PHPDoc is an adaptation of Javadoc for the PHP programming language. It is still an informal standard for commenting PHP code, but it is in the process of being formalized. It allows external document generators like PHPDocumentor, which is the de facto standard implementation, to generate documentation of APIs and help some IDEs such as Zend Studio, NetBeans, JetBrains PhpStorm, ActiveState Komodo Edit and IDE, phpEdit and Aptana Studio to interpret variable types and other ambiguities in the loosely typed language and to provide improved code completion, type hinting and debugging. PHPDoc supports documentation of both object-oriented and procedural code. On August 13, 2013, the PHP Framework Interoperability Group began writing a formal specification for PHPDoc. Components of PHPDoc. DocBlock A docBlock is an extended C++ style PHP comment that begins with / and has an asterisk at the beginning of every line. DocBlocks precede the element they are documenting. Any line within a docBlock that doesn't begin with A will be ignored. To document function foo, place the docBlock immediately before the function declaration. This example will apply the docBlock to define aclo, to. Instead of to function foo. Define statements, functions, classes, class methods, and class vars, include statements, and global variables can all be documented. See elements of the source code that can be documented. A docBlock contains 3 basic segments in this order: short description, long description, tags. The short description starts on the first line, and can be terminated with a blank line or a period. A period inside a word is ignored. If the short description would become more than 3 lines long, only the first line is taken. The long description continues for as many lines as desired and may contain HTML markup for display formatting. Here is a sample docBlock with a short and a long description. Optionally, you may enclose all paragraphs in a tag. Be careful, if the first paragraph does not begin with PHPDocumentor will assume that the docBlock is using the simple double-line break to define paragraph breaks as in. Here is an example of using. PHPDocumentor also supports Javadoc's docBlock format through the command line option J, Javadoc desk. Due to the non-XHTML compliant unmatched p tag, it is highly recommended to avoid this syntax whenever possible. PHPDocumentor will convert all whitespace into a single space in the long description, use paragraph breaks to define new lines, or, as discussed in the next section. DocBlock description details. In some parsers the long and short description of a docBlock is parsed for a few select HTML tags that determine additional formatting. Because not all HTML is allowed, they will generally be converted into plain text or more content-specific tags. For example, a tag may be converted into in docBlock. Here is a list of tags supported by PHPDocumentor. Emphasize bold text. Use this to surround PHP code. Some converters will highlight it. Hardline break may be ignored by some converters. Italicize mark as important. Denote keyboard input screen display. List item, ordered list, if used to enclose all paragraphs, otherwise it will be considered text. Preserve line breaks and spacing, and assume all tags are text. Denote sample or examples. Unordered list, denote a variable name. For the rare case when the text is needed in a docBlock, use a double delimiter as in. PHPDocumentor will automatically translate that to the physical text. Using and, both and ignore any HTML listed above. docBlock templates. The purpose of a docBlock template is to reduce redundant typing. For instance, if a large number of class variables are private, one would use a docBlock template to mark them as private. docBlock templates simply augment any normal docBlocks found in the template block. A docBlock template is distinguished from a normal docBlock by its header. Here is the most basic docBlock template. The text that marks this as a docBlock template is /@ plus all 6 characters must be present. docBlock templates are applied to all documentable elements until the ending template marker. Note that all A characters must appear in order for PHPDocumentor to recognize them as a template. Page-level doc blocks. A page-level doc block is the only doc block that cannot precede the element that it is documenting, as there is no way to precede a file. To solve this issue, the way PHPDocumentor finds a page-level doc block is to pass the first doc block in a file as the page-level doc block, with certain conditions. This last example has one doc block, and it is the first doc block in a file, but it is not a page-level doc block. How can PHPDocumentor tell the difference between a page-level doc block and any other doc block? Simple. In PHPDocumentor version 1.2.2, a page-level doc block is the first doc block in a file if it contains a @package tag. However, this example will raise a warning like warning in test PHP on line 8. Page-level doc block precedes define almost, use another doc block to document the source element. You can eliminate the warning by adding documentation to the define as follows. Now, the page has its documentation, and the define has its own documentation. So, a doc block is a page-level doc block if and only if it is both, the first doc block in a file, either, contains a @package tag, or, is immediately followed by another doc block for any documentable PHP element. A page-level doc block may have any of the standard PHPDocumentor tags plus the following tags: @package, @subpackage. PHPDocumentor will not document a file like the first example. There must be at least one documentable PHP element in the file. Tags are single words prefixed by a symbol. Tags inform parsers how to present information and modify display of documentation as well as allow the IDE to define variable types. All tags are optional, but if you use a tag, they do have specific requirements to parse properly. In addition, some parsers allow two additional inline tags, @id, used to allow direct linking to sections in a tutorial, and @toc, used to generate a table of contents from IDEs in the file. Think of it like an HTML tag as it serves the same function. For more in-depth discussion of PHPDoc tags, see http, manual PHPDoc tutorial tags pkg.html. Packages. To understand the role of packages and how to use @package, it is important to know the logic behind packaging in PHP. The quest for structured programming led to the invention of functions, then classes, and finally packages. Traditionally, a reusable software module was a collection of variables, constants and functions that could be used by another software package. PHP is an example of this model, as there are many extensions that consist of constants and functions like the tokenizer extension. One can think of the tokenizer extension as a package. It is a complete set of data, variables and functions that can be used in other programs. A more structured format of this model is of course objects, or classes. A class contains variables and functions. A single class packages together related functions and variables to be reused. PHPDocumentor defines package in two ways: functions, constants and global variables are grouped into files, which are in turn grouped into packages using the @package tag in a page-level doc block. Methods and class variables are grouped into classes, which are in turn grouped into packages in a class doc block. These two definitions of package are exclusive. In other words, it is possible to have classes of a different package of the file that contains it. See also, API Gen, PHPDocumentor, Doxygen, comparison of documentation generators. References, ABC PHP Fig, PS a working draft, https, github config standards master phpDoc @return tag, PHPDocumentor. External links, doc blocks, phpDocumentor.org,